Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with mathematician and programmer Noah Healy. He is a recreational mathematician and programmer working on upgrading capitalism for the computer age. Markets, math, and technology are his big areas, with some history, culture, and economics to fill in the gaps. We get into a lot on this interview. Enjoy.
Thanks for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Before we dive into your life and exactly what you do, I want to ask you how you survived the last couple of years with COVID. You know, we're kind of coming out of it now. The world's waking up. How did you survive it? How did that time period change the way that you approach life now?
I was working as sort of a day job as a data scientist for a company that went pretty virtual pretty quickly. We took about a month off that they made and leased slot machines to Indian casinos, and I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but the Indian tribes in this country were hit pretty hard by COVID, and so quite a few of the casinos effectively just shut down for several months. So they had some money, and they got some more from the government, and they gave all of us practically a month off, and then they were, shuffling things around a bit, but I was essential, so I was doing remote stuff for them. And then year and a half ago, as things were starting to really open up and they were starting to talk about going back to the office, my primary project, the thing that I talk about on podcasts and stuff, had actually been getting a lot of momentum because people were so much more willing to network and talk online that I had a lot of things sort of balls in the air, and so I left, and I basically work out of my living room, reaching around the world trying to talk to people innovating in marketplaces. So overall, the whole thing has sort of been an advantage for me.
Let me get to kind of an idea of, you're a recreational mathematician and a programmer, but I want to kind of make this understandable to everybody. If I put you in front of a bunch of third graders at a career day and one of the kids looks up and asks you what you do for a living, how do you answer them?
I figure out how things work, and I figure out if they can work better, and I build the stuff that makes them work better. A lot of that comes down to statistics, which is basically just counting. That was one of the points I used to make when I was working as a data scientist. Mostly what I did was count and do arithmetic, and people don't like doing that stuff, and they're willing to pay a lot of money to somebody who will do it for them.
So when you were a kid, you were in grade school, what did you want to be when you grew up? What was your dream?
Never had any desire to be anything when I grew up, ever. I was good at math, and I had fun reading until I got to school, and I got broken by the kind of pathetic stuff that they give first graders. I got back into reading when I was 8, and I started pretty avidly reading science fiction. Somewhere around, I think, 7th grade, I started bringing pleasure reading to school to read during school. I would basically finish a class early, and then just pull a book out and read it during the class. And so I've always kind of just done what's in front of me, and kind of spent a lot of time on my personal development. I like reading, I like learning, and so I just do that all the time.
So talk to me a little bit more about your childhood. All these things kind of add up to who we are. Talk to me about where you were born and raised and kind of how some of these seeds were planted in you to become who you are today.
Well, I was born and raised right here in the town I'm still in. Let's see. I did start reading early. The first book I can recall reading to myself all the way through was Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. That was before I started school. I grew up in a fairly rural part of town, and the town was a lot smaller back then. And so we had a large wooded area across the street that I didn't really go to because you don't cross streets when you're like, 3. And we had a dense bamboo grove in our backyard with a creek running behind it. So played there a lot. Got a brother who's a couple of years younger than I am. That's my first memory, actually, was his birth. And so, yeah, I sort of just played around in nature for my early childhood. Then school happened, and I was sort of exposed to the fact that there's a lot of other people in the world, which is kind of a weird thing. I mean, I'd seen town and gone to the library and things like that, but there weren't a lot of kids my age in my neighborhood. In fact, there was one. And so yeah, I got into school and turned out I was a lot better at math than almost everybody. So that was easy. And I was also a lot worse at spelling than almost everybody. So that was hard. And just kind of floated along through school. Still spent lots of my time out in the woods. My parents separated and then got divorced and remarried. So from 8-ish, my brother and I would go back and forth between 2 separate homes multiple times per week. So that creates an interesting, parent-child dynamic. You basically can't be punished anymore because, like, if you're grounded, you're going to leave in a day. And yeah, I just read a lot and spent time out in nature and got introduced to new things in school every once in a while. Wasn't really that into school as a kid because it was so repetitive. Went to college again, more or less seemed like a decent idea. I'd already been going. I was part of several pilot programs to advance the mathematical instructional speed in our local schools, and so I was, I think, technically 3 grade levels ahead by the time I graduated, and had been taking classes in the University of Virginia for 2 years by then. Went to UVA in the engineering school. Again, didn't have a direction in life. Wound up taking a bunch of nuclear engineering courses because one of the survey intro classes had a good professor, and he was in that department. So I took classes there, and then got the idea that led me to my thesis. I was the president of the Games Club at UVA. A local CIO was hiring and knew me for years, so he more or less gave me a job, and that slotted me over into computers, and that's when I started studying computer mathematics background. After that, for the last couple decades, I've been bouncing around mostly in tech startups, writing back office software. Although there's been some breaks for layoffs, had a house fire 18 years ago now, lost about a year to that. And yeah, just about a decade ago, was working for a company where I finished the job they hired me for, and they had no careers as a policy, and so I wanted to take some time anyway, as sort of sabbatical, to think about math, just see what that would be like, because it seemed like fun. And so I did that and came up with this idea for how to upgrade economics. And so that's been my driver since then.
So if you can meet anybody alive on the planet right now, who would it be? Who would you love to talk to?
Well, for what I'm doing right now, I'd guess the chairman of the CME group would probably be the single most valuable person for me to be face-to-face with.
So who's been a role model for you in your life? Who's been kind of someone you've always universally looked up to?
Well, my parents, I suppose. I don't really associate with very many people, so that doesn't work out. I guess I did go on a jag of reading biographies when I was 9. Yeah, that was the year. I read something like 100 biographies of significant persons, and I've taken lessons from a lot of their things. Mark Twain, Addison, those sorts of things. But I'm also a really inveterate consumer of fiction, so I'll take lessons from Achilles and Hercules and Thor too. Not much difference to me. Milo or what was the space cadet's name? I cannot remember, actually, which is weird because that's a good one. Robert Heinlein's Space Cadet. That's what actually got me back into reading the main character's name. It's very disturbing, but I'm terrible with names anyway.
It'll probably come to you later for sure. So let me ask you this. If you look back on your life and let's say you have a dream tonight, you run into the young version of yourself, say in your 20s, and you could give that version a piece of advice based on the life you've lived so far. What would you tell your young version?
Well, it's a thing I've sort of seen over and over again. I always knew it. I just sort of never do it. Is to do more. I'm a very lazy person, and when I do things, when I take initiative, it's on average pretty successful, but I just don't do it because I'm lazy. And so better outcomes are available, and I know how to do it, but I don't do it anyway. On the other hand, I have a bit of a cheat code because in my 20s, my grandfather was still alive, and my grandfather was the CEO of the Dairy Council before he retired, and had massive political and industry connections in a commodity field. So if I could tell my 20s self the solution to this particular math problem that I worked out when I was in my 30s, he would have had a much easier time developing it than I do, just because I'd have much better connections at that point. But yeah, that's cheating, I think.
So let me ask you this: everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, those that work with you, but ultimately you're the one that lives your life. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I just think I'm me, really. Like, I'm not that obsessed about it, and I'm mostly focused on being happy and not disappointed in myself. So I just kind of go with what looks like could achieve those ends. It's a little weird to me how simultaneously divergent my life is from basically everybody I encounter, and how convergently interested people are when I, break through the shell and actually have conversations with people. But that doesn't really affect me. That affects like other people.
Excellent. Hey, Noah, if anyone out there wants to learn more about you and anything that you do, where's the best place on the web for them to go?
Probably my LinkedIn profile, actually, because I keep my podcast stuff up to date. But there's also a website called Coordisc.com, COORDISC, and that's got the stuff about what I'm working on and links to, white papers and video explanations and so on.
Excellent. Noah, hey, thank you for opening up. Thank you for taking time out. Good luck with everything. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.